In this session, we are continuing over the Spring Security internal demo. This is part 2, and in this session, we will be looking into more of the filters and complete flow of authentication. So I'm on this login page and I'm going to enter my credential, which is admin. But before hitting the sign in button, let me just introduce you to few of the filters uh, which are going to be invoked behind the scenes to handle this login operation. Since we are already clear with the default login page and generating filter and authorization filter in the previous session, we are going to remove all the breakpoints. So I have already removed it. So the next new filter which I want to introduce is uh, abstract authentication processing filter. So this is an abstract class. So let's understand what are its implementation classes of this abstract filter class. So you can hover here and click on this blue button, and you can see there are two classes: username password authentication filter and one-time token authentication filter. This is the new class which is introduced in Spring Security 7 for OTT based authentication, but we are more interested in the default functionality, so we will be going inside this username password authentication filter. So inside this filter, let me just find a method which is do filter, and once if you click here, this is an implementation of your abstract authentication processing filter. So you will be go back to the parent class and inside the do filter method. So I'll just add a breakpoint here inside the do filter, and if you try to understand the logic at high level, you can see there is an attempt authentication method is being called, which contains the actual logic of attempting the authentication. And if we go here, this is an abstract method which is authentication method. So the actual logic of this authentication attempt authentication is inside your username password authentication filter. So let me just attempt authentication. So I have added a breakpoint here. So you may have a question, which is how do you know all these filter names? So based upon the logging level which we set in the application.yaml, you will find the filter names getting invoked with the number or order in your console. So you can see here. So you can find n number of filters like disable encoder and the order of their execution. So from here you can find the your filter. So we are also looking into this username password authentication filter, logout filter, and all the other filters. So let's just clear the logs, and let's just go to the browser, and our debug is enabled, and we will just click on sign in. So we are inside the abstract authentication processing filter inside the do filter method. So this method decide whether the authentication is required or not, and if authentication is required, it is required to invoke the attempt authentication method. So this class also has other methods, like if you go down and see requires authentication, attempt authentication, success authentication. So you can find this particular thing, which is the security context. So this is the place where your security context is being populated with authentication details. So let's just go to the thread and let's just go where we were. Yes. So you can see the my condition directly jumps into the try, because in the security context no authentication is done previously. This is a fresh request. So now this attempt authentication request gets invoked. So you can get it here and get to the implementation part and just resume the play button, and now you are inside the username password authentication filter. So inside this username password authentication filter, if you try to debug line by line, you can see for this obtain username, we got the input from the form of HTTP servlet request and response. From these objects, this filter is going to extract the username and the password. So let's just execute it line by line. So my username is admin, the password is also an admin. Now we are here at this particular line number 83. From our previous discussion on like step 2 of the authentication, if I show you, so in this step 2 the authentication object is getting created, but why we are seeing this username password authentication token here? So username password authentication is a class which is child or subclass of your authentication interface, and you cannot directly create an object of interface, so we need some implementation class. So if you go here in the username password authentication token, you can check the abstract, and abstract authentication token is implementing the authentication interface. So if I again go to step by step, you would be able to see an authenticate method. We are found to populate the username credential into this username authentication token. So let me just go to this authenticate method. So you will find this constructor, and inside this constructor there is a all your credential plus your set authenticated as false. So we are not sure whether this user will get authenticated or not at later stages. So this is a starter value set by the Spring framework to not sure about the whether the user get authenticated or not. So let's just go to here and debug to the next line, and you can see the get authentication manager dot authenticate method. So it is trying to invoke the authentication manager, and inside authentication manager we have the authenticate method. So let me debug authenticate method as well. Go to, so we are in the authentication manager, and this is also an interface, and if we go to its implementation class, so implementation class, so it would be the provider manager. So provider manager is a class that is implementing the your authentication manager. So inside this authenticate method you will be see a for loop. Okay, so on this line number 174, which is going to iterate all over the applicable authentication providers. So this provider manager is going to check all the providers by invoking the authenticate method. And with this for loop, you are pretty much clear that we have multiple authentication provider configured inside the project, So the goal of the authentication manager is to try with all the applicable authentication provider by providing or invoking the authenticate method. So in our scenario, the default authentication provider implementation is going to be invoked, which is like the DAO authentication provider. So DAO authentication provider. So okay, so this is class is implementing the abstract user detail authentication provider. And if I go to here, and this is also implementing the authentication provider. So it is this DAO authentication provider is an subclass of your authentication provider. So it has an authenticate method. If I go to authenticate method, but before that, let's see the authentication provider interface. So and if you hover to this green icon, you can see there are a number of class implementation for different scenario. So we are more interested in the DAO, the default authentication provider, and let's move to its one of the method, which is authenticate method. Okay, so let's add a breakpoint here, and we'll start the flow. So we are inside here. So the first, it is so the role of this particular authentication provider, so it will take the help from user detail manager, okay, and user detail service to load the user details from the storage system. And once the user details are basically loaded, it also going to take help from password encoders to validate the passwords are matching or not. So let's just debug line by line. So it is determining the user, it is checking whether the user details are available in the cache or not. Then we have the retrieve user method. So let's go inside this user retrieve user, and we will go to its one of the implementation, which is this, and you can find the user detail or user detail class. So it is basically retrieving or loading the user from the storage system. So if I go to load user by username, so user detail services and interface, so we will see what all implementation classes are there. So there is an in-memory user detail manager, which is going to be invoked by default. So if we go to in-memory user detail manager, and I'll just add a breakpoint here and just move to here. So now the user is getting fetched, then the user is getting set inside the user object. Do you know why this class gets invoked by default? Because we are storing the user detail inside the in-memory storage, but later on we will also see how to store the user detail inside the different separate system like database. At that point of time, the framework will use some other user detail manager, that is like JDBC user detail manager. So we will look into later that, but now let's just move to our next step. So now the user details are basically loaded. You can see, I'll just click on here. See, now once this user details are loaded, we are inside the abstract user details authentication provider. Now, if you can see, there is a method which is additional authentication checks. So now, till now, like the user information is now extracted. If you can see here, username is admin, and there is a password which is encoded, but there is no checks happen that the password which is stored in memory and the password which is sent by the user is matching or not. Then only you will be able to tell that your user is a authenticated user. So we'll just get into this additional authentication checks, and you can go to its implementation. So now we are here. So I'll just add a breakpoint here and just click on continue. So let's just focus on this presented password. So if I click on presented password is your admin, okay, and it is extracting the credential from here, and if our password gets matched or if our password didn't match, it will throw in bad credentials exception. So but now we have us given the correct password, so we are not getting any bad credentials exceptions. Our execution will run as a fine, and we are inside the abstract user detail authentication provider. So next couple of method will gets execute. Then I'm again inside the abstract authentication processing filter, and now if you can see the authentication, the other logic is now is not executing, and I'll just click on resume, and I can see I'm able to log in here. Why I'm getting this page? Because this is not the correct page which I enter, but the authentication would be applied on all of the pages. So if I hit again, you can see here now inside my security context already this particular details is now set, because the successful method for setting the security context is already executed earlier. So if you can see, nothing gets executed because I already have the security context entries in the memory. So I hope like you like this particular session, and we will catch up in next video, and I hope like you are understanding all the lectures, and I'm hoping for good feedback from you all. So, and also just do like our channel and subscribe to the channel and share with your fellow developers. I'll catch you in the next session, and thank you.